So I'm going to be talking not about the talk that is on the event schedule. I came up with this because I thought this was more relevant, on democratic, bottom-up, and pluralistic digital governance. And this is going to be kind of a smattering of different projects that are done by my lab. And I lead this lab called the Social Futures Lab at University of Washington on reimagining social and collaborative systems to empower people and improve society. And what I think is cool about our lab is that we really sit at this intersection of like computer science, social science, and also design. So we're thinking about ways to build new software and systems to support bettering society. And those are my wonderful students and lab mates. Okay, so I'm going to kind of like speed through this because I think we all agree on many of these points and we already know them. But basically that there are many of these societal problems related to communication, information online, hate speech, misinformation, abuse, harassment. Lots of work understanding this. These are problems that predate the internet, but what's new today about these problems as they manifest online is this issue of scale, right? They are manifesting in settings where we have these very highly and very centralized kind of control. We have platforms hosting and serving content for millions of people. We have nowadays generative AI models producing content for millions of people, and it is this very kind of centralized setting which we didn't really have before. And some would say, you know, with this scale comes the opportunity, maybe even the moral imperative, to try to combat these societal problems via these regimes, these like content moderation, curation, recommendation regimes, AI alignment regimes. And even if you disagree with that statement, I would say that actually doesn't matter if you disagree or not. Those working behind these systems, you can't actually shirk from this work because there is no neutral way to generate content, curate content, moderate, recommend. There is no like natural thing to do. So even if you're not doing anything, you're doing something. So we have to think about how we're going to do this. However, we can think about the way in which we do this and perhaps doing it in a better way. So maybe the kind of norm today of these massive regimes is this kind of like autocratic, top-down, one-size-fits-all model. This is true for quite a lot of things online today. Could we think of them in more democratic, bottom-up, and pluralistic ways? And I can talk about why I think that those are good things. I think most of you agree with me. If you don't agree with me, we can chat after the talk about why I think these are good things. But I'll just assume that you think that they're good. And I'll talk a little bit about different projects that we have that are seeking to further that vision. So, you know, instead of autocratic rule, you know, I like democracy. Could we have more democratic decision making? How can we do decision making collectively at scale? That's kind of hard. Instead of this kind of like top-down directive, like Facebook saying something or the CDC saying something, you know, what can we do that's more bottom-up? That's kind of coming from individuals talking to each other, everyday people kind of communicating with peers about issues like misinformation or hate. And instead of these one-size-fits-all regimes where, you know, we all have to use the same recommender, we all have to use the same, be under the same content moderation kind of approach, could we have a plurality of approaches? And to ask that question is the follow-on question: how do we devolve these kind of one-size-fits-all kind of decisions that are happening at the central point of control down to individuals and smaller communities? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about each because I don't have a lot of time. So on the first question of designing better collective decision-making processes working at scale, what does better mean? I'm going to talk a little bit about legitimacy, consistency, and alignment to community values. So on the topic of legitimacy, we have done some work along with my collaborator, Jenny Fan, on thinking about more democratic approaches to content moderation. So we have this one paper where we argued for digital juries, a jury system for content moderation. And the reason why we talk about this is because juries can scale, actually. You can run lots of them in parallel, and you know, if you have a jury system, like everyone can participate. We find through some experiments they're perceived as more democratically legitimate, perhaps no surprise, than the kind of status quo today, which is commercial content moderation with algorithms and paid contractors. There's also been some work from another lab that shows that online juries can make consistent and repeatable decisions, actually. So that's good. We have some follow-on work, not published yet, still analyzing, where we're now thinking, okay, so maybe if we did have a jury system, how would you do jury composition? And what would people think are legitimate jury compositions. And so we ran a large survey across a number of communities, Discord, Facebook groups, Reddit, Twitter. Some interesting results. I'm still parsing it, and we're still running analyses. Overall, so this is like a legitimacy score. Higher is perceived more legitimate. And these are a bunch of different jury compositions that we asked people about. People tend to prefer juries of experts and juries of demographically diverse people the most. And we also asked about juries of people likely to be harmed. There's been a lot of interest in kind of restorative justice lately. It turned out this was not perceived as very legitimate, but there could be a number of reasons for that. Still trying to understand that. We've also done follow-on work where we kind of compared juries, expert panels, paid contractors, and algorithms. We asked them to rate kind of the legitimacy of these processes, but we also asked them to kind of look at a case. We gave it a random outcome, and then we also asked them, before we gave it a random outcome, what the people thought they thought the outcome should be. And we found out that while there were some differences in the preference for different types of procedures, actually outcome alignment ended up being like the dominating factor, which is interesting. It kind of goes to show that there are limits to kind of playing with procedural designs, right? Like at the end of the day, like outcomes still really matter. Maybe if you look at like what's happening with the Supreme Court, you'd understand like, yes, outcomes are important, even if you really care about the thinking about procedural legitimacy. Other aspects that were seen as important were kind of having multiple people, having deliberation as a component, but kind of similar to the prior study, expertise was highly kind of rated. However, experts don't really scale. We're seeing that perhaps with like the Facebook Oversight Board. So we're trying to understand currently how we can make kind of layperson juries more expert-like. So adding training, adding qualifications, larger groups, deliberation, this like demographic splits, et cetera, to improve perceived legitimacy. But that's still ongoing. Okay, so that was a bit on that. I talked about legitimacy. What about issues like consistency and community value alignment? So this is some work done by a postdoc of mine, Jim, who has been thinking about kind of case law versus constitutional approaches to decision making. So when it comes to these decisions that you're making at content moderation or like, what should the algorithm show? It's really complicated, right? You have these content moderation training guidelines that go up to like hundreds and hundreds of pages. And also for the policy teams writing this, it's like extremely hard, right? And so one of the things that we thought was, okay, instead of trying to take this constitutional approach to writing down your values or writing down rules, what if we took an analogy from case law, right? We try to build up this very complex decision bound via deciding cases that are around the border. These cases could become precedents, and then a community could thus encode its values via both these kind of high-level constitutional rules, as well as a body of precedents that the community has decided on. And in some ways, like you could argue that like machine learning and training and that sort of thing is kind of like this on accident, but we kind of want to do this on purpose. So the idea here being that with new cases, people can see prior cases, justify their judgments of a case using precedents taken from this like decided body of cases, which we found does improve consistency. You can also do things like find areas of where there's like sparsity in terms of precedents by having multiple people do this and then seeing where their precedent sets kind of disagree. Oh shoot, I gotta go a lot faster. Okay, the next category of things was kind of like this like Habermasian idea of like, people talking to each other creates a better society. And so we have this large NSF project where we're trying to help people have better conversations with their peers, particularly about misinformation in this context. We're building tools, resources, educational materials, trying to build some community support as well. From interviewing people who do, talk to their peers about misinformation, it's hard. Perhaps you all have experienced this. Like, it's time-consuming. It's hard to know what to say. It's hard to know if you're having any effect on the person you're talking to. It's very emotionally draining. And so we are trying to now develop tools to help people. One is kind of culling all the research literature on what are effective ways of response. So different kinds of strategies. Can we then build tools to like recommend to people the different kinds of response, as well as like using LLMs to help like give people ideas of different ways to respond. We've also done studies that look at kind of moral foundations theory, and if we can teach people moral foundations theory, could they then learn to like reframe their arguments in the moral values of the other side, gain greater empathy from the other side? So we built a tool that did that, and did indeed find that it helped people. And then the very last thing I wanted to say was just like devolving decisions more to communities and to individuals. We did a large-scale representative survey that found that actually people do prefer to have personal controls to set their levels of moderation for different kinds of speech. We tested hate speech, violent speech, sexually explicit content, as opposed to having a platform-wide setting. So people say they want this. And this is like another whole big research area of mine, which is like kind of thinking about federalist polycentric governance designs to kind of devolve governance from this top-down level. So, tools to help communities be able to govern in different, diverse, less autocratic ways, as well as tools for individuals to be able to do things like come up with their own feeds and like design feeds and share them with each other. Okay. I think that's it. So, and I'm out of time. So I'm happy to answer any questions about all of those. I know I went very quickly about a bunch of projects. So thanks. Colin.
Thanks so much, Amy. One of the things that I find so direction simultaneously.
Yeah. So the question is, we're working on a lot of different things. Is there kind of like a unifying thing, or is there something that we like have students kind of try to align on when we're doing different research projects? I try to give my students a lot of autonomy, but I think there are some things that kind of ground our lab. So one is this idea of like user agency or like human agency, like giving people the tools to be able to do things for themselves, as opposed to like as a designer, like making decisions for them. And the degree to which we can do that, like people, there's also information overload and like decision paralysis for everybody, right? So just thinking about what's the best ways in which we can help people do things or like give them the tools to do things, I think is important. And then other than that, I think, just taking like a very human-centered approach and like thinking about societal harm, I think is broadly. So we're still analyzing the qualitative results. So we did a large-scale survey on this, and we asked them to rate and rank. Oh, sorry. The question was the results regarding different types of jury compositions. Why is it that a jury of people most likely to be harmed was rated the lowest? And so we had this survey, and they were rating things and they were ranking things, and we did have like a qualitative answer component where they could kind of explain their rationale. We're still looking at that, so I can't say for sure right now. But one of the things I've been thinking of is that like, I think for a lot of people, these ideas of restorative justice are still new, to be honest. Like people are familiar with juries being random or democratically representative or these kinds of things. But I think this idea of just like asking the people who are most likely to be harmed is a new idea for people. So it may be something where they just haven't encountered it before. So I wonder if there's an element of like needing to learn about that and understand what that's like, perhaps. I think that's all. And I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Okay.